have the contours of Jerusalem's future already been determined in brick and asphalt, in fences and walls and checkpoints? When Palestinians look at what's not only desirable, but at what's achievable, have they had to scale back their expectations of what they'd be willing to accept in a final settlement? Still with us, Ofer Zaltzberg of the International Crisis Group, Don Arbel, a veteran Israeli diplomat now at American University in Washington, and Aziz Abu Sara of George Mason University. And Aziz, this long two-decade period since Oslo has allowed a lot of things to happen in advance of a final settlement. Has this put pressure on Palestinians to perhaps come in short of what they had wanted because they don't want to suffer any more losses?
No, not really. I think Palestinians are desperate for a peace agreement. I think if you talk to Palestinian people on the street are desperate to end this conflict. The toll is really high, especially in places like in East Jerusalem, where you feel it really day to day, in the West Bank as well, in Gaza. So there is a desperate look, but also there's a frustration and lack of hope. There's hopelessness, there's despairity, saying, this is just not happening. We've been negotiating for 20 years. Is this really the path for us to get a state? Palestinians don't share the views of Ofer in the sense, oh, it's not a big deal, the settlements won't affect it. I mean, you have 300,000 settlers in East Jerusalem, of what would have been East Jerusalem. You can't move those away, but often when we talk about these settlers, we talk about land that will be exchanged. And Palestinians don't see that, oh, cool, it's okay. The more settlements being built, the more land is being lost, and then saying, we'll replace it with other land somewhere else, so just don't worry about it. That's when Palestinians hear that, they say, we'll take what we want during this time we're negotiating, and then later on, we'll give you something else in exchange. And that's unacceptable for Palestinians. There is no reason to negotiate over a land that's being taken away while you're negotiating at the same time.
Ofer, when we talk about land swaps, do we also have to concede that land in and around Jerusalem, because of its tremendous symbolic importance to what it shows the rest of the world, is not like land elsewhere in the long border between these two small states?
Absolutely, and I want just to explain, I also agree with what Aziz is saying in terms of the basic problem of settlements, 300,000 people. I was referring to whether there have been dramatic changes since 2000 and specifically 2008, and I would argue there have not been. Yes, the value of land in East Jerusalem is particularly high, and when one talks about land swaps, it's not only about quantity, but also about quality. And we have not seen so far that the Israeli government, if it really wanted to compensate for Palestinians for this land, offered something that they find sufficiently meaningful. This does not mean that Israel does not have such assets, though. It does not mean that such a deal is not possible. It does mean that what Israel proposed so far is insufficient.
Don, as we sit here and watch this from the United States, we're not always privy to domestic political considerations that press on any current Israeli prime minister or cabinet. Does Benjamin Netanyahu face things internally among his own polity that make it hard for him to cut a deal around Jerusalem?
Well, I agree that politics plays a very important role on both sides, both in Prime Minister Netanyahu's considerations as well as Abu Mazen's considerations. Now, when you talk about Prime Minister Netanyahu's considerations, you have to start with a departure point should be that Jerusalem is a consensual issue, that most Zionist parties in Israel support a unified Jerusalem as the capital of the Jewish state, and so on. Now, these recent moves that we've seen in recent weeks of different members of Knesset attempting to go on Temple Mount, they're clearly politically motivated. And the different statements coming out of Prime Minister Netanyahu are also politically motivated. It's not all of a sudden that the things have changed overnight. There hasn't been a change on the ground. And these are pretty much have to do with the fact that Netanyahu is right now involved in a competition or trying to get to stop the spilling over of voters from the Jewish Home Party, Naftali Bennett's party, to Netanyahu's party. And this way, by posturing as more right-wing than he usually is, that's what he thinks can get him the
John
upper hand.
Abel, Aziz Abu Sara, Ofer Salzberg, thank you all. Happy Thanksgiving. That brings us to the end of Inside Story. I'm Ray Suarez.